The night stretched across the village like an endless blanket of silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy as if the world itself is holding its breath. The small wooden houses sat under the watchful eye of the moon, their windows glowing faintly with the warm light of oil lamps. Inside, the family slept soundly, unaware of what was descending from the stars. Above, their dog, curled at the foot of the bed, growled softly in his dreams, sensing perhaps some disturbance that the human ear could not yet catch. Far beyond the clouds, the sky began to crack open with a thin line of burning red that widened with each heartbeat until it became a wound, spilling fire across the heavens. The Galactic Empire was coming, and its ships moved with the precision of predators. The air trembled as the first ship pierced the atmosphere, cloaked in smoke and flame, its surface black, like obsidian with jagged edges that reflected the moonlight like a blade. Villagers stirred in their sleep, some woken by the thunderous roar of engines, others clutching at their children as the earth itself seemed to shake. But none of them knew that the target of this invasion was not the village as a whole. It was a single family whose bloodline carried secrets older than the empire itself. The soldiers within the ship prepared their descent, their helmets gleaming with red lenses, their armor whispering with the hum of unseen power. The house stood at the edge of the forest, away from the heart of the village. The family lived in peace, raising their children in the shadow of old trees, their dog always watchful, their lives simple and unremarkable. Or so they believed. The father stirred slightly in his sleep as the distant rumble reached his ears, but the sound faded as if swallowed by the night, and he settled once more, unaware that destiny was creeping closer with every moment. The mother dreamed of walking through the woods, her hand holding that of her youngest child. But even in her dream, the trees seemed darker than usual, as if they too knew what was coming. Above the house, the ship hovered without a sound, a black triangle blotting out the stars, its engines muted by alien technology. A hatch slid open, spilling a beam of pale blue light onto the ground below, and from this light descended figures, tall and menacing, wrapped in armor that glowed faintly at the seams. They moved with a grace that did not belong to men, their steps silent, their weapons already drawn. The dog stirred, first his ears pricking up, his growl low and warning, but the sound was swallowed by the steady hum that filled the room as the invaders drew closer. The door splintered without a sound, as if erased rather than broken, and the cold night air rushed into the house. The father rose instantly, pulling his children close, while the mother shielded them with trembling arms. The dog leaped forward, barking fiercely, his body a blur of defiance against the towering figures that filled the doorway. The soldiers raised their weapons, their red lenses glowing brighter as they scanned the family, their voices mechanical and hollow as they issued commands in a language that no human tongue could mimic. The father shouted, but his words were meaningless against the tide of power that had entered his home. One soldier reached out a gloved hand and seized the mother, pulling her toward the blue light, while another grabbed the children. The father fought back, striking out with desperate fury, but the soldiers moved like shadows. His strength was nothing against their precision. The dog lunged, snapping at armored limbs, but was kicked aside with brutal force. Whimpering yet still refusing to stay down, the family screamed as they were dragged into the cold light of the Empire ship above the village. The hatch began to close, the blue glow fading until the house was once again swallowed in silence. The only sign of what had happened was the echo of the dog barking into the night, and the faint shimmer of stars swallowed by the black triangle vanishing into the sky. The family was pulled into the ship as if swallowed by the sky, the blue beam fading behind them, leaving the world they knew, shrinking into a memory. The chamber they were thrown into was vast, metallic and cold, the walls pulsing with strange light that seemed alive. The children clung to their mother, while the father tried to rise against the armored soldiers who stood like statues, their faces hidden behind helmets with glowing red lenses. The dog limped from the kick he had taken, but still bared his teeth, ready to fight again. The sound of doors sliding shut echoed like thunder, and the air inside the ship was heavy with a smell both sharp and alien. The soldiers moved with perfect precision, one motion flowing into the next as they bound the family with cuffs of luminous energy that burned to the touch. The father struggled, but the more he fought, the tighter they became. The mother whispered to calm the children, though her own voice shook with fear. The dog barked furiously, until one soldier raised a hand and a wave of invisible force slammed the animal against the wall, silencing him with a whimper. The children screamed, but no soldier turned. No sympathy flickered in the glowing eyes behind the helmets. Through a high, arching doorway, the family was forced to march deeper into the ship. The corridors were long and lined with pulsating veins of light, like arteries carrying power. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, as if life itself was being drained. Away they passed chambers where machines stirred and hissed, where other captives, human and not human, sat in cages, their eyes empty. Some whispered words in tongues the family could not understand, others sat in silence, their spirit broken. The children clung tighter to their mother, their small hands trembling. The dog limped beside them, his growls low and steady. At last they were brought into a chamber vast as a cathedral, the walls rising so high they disappeared into shadow. In the center stood a throne-like structure made of black steel and silver wires. A figure sat upon it, tall and imposing, its armor unlike the soldiers adorned with jagged edges and a crown of light. The commander of the ship gazed down at the family with eyes like burning coals, though no face could be seen behind the mask of shifting metal. Its voice rumbled through the chamber, vibrating the air itself. The commander spoke in words that twisted and hissed, a language older than stars, yet somehow the family understood, not by hearing but by feeling. The meaning seeped into their bones. It told them they were chosen. It told them their flesh and blood would serve the Empire. It told them their essence carried something the Empire craved, though it did not reveal what the father tried to shout in defiance. But his words dissolved under the weight of the voice. The mother closed her eyes, fighting to remain strong for her children. The dog barked, once sharp and defiant, and for a moment even the soldiers shifted uneasily. The commander raised one hand and images appeared in the air, a swirl of galaxies, planets, and strange symbols woven with lines of fire. Among them, a single thread, pulsing brighter than all the rest. The commander pointed to the family and then to that thread, its meaning clear. The blood of this family was connected to something vast and ancient, something the Empire desired above all else. The father felt dread in his chest. The mother felt her heart pound like a drum, and the children clutched her as if she could shield them from the stars themselves. The chamber darkened, the light folding inward until only the family remained illuminated. Like prey in the gaze of a predator, the soldiers began to chant, their hollow voices filling the room. As the commander rose from the throne, with the weight of inevitability, the dog snarled louder, refusing to be silenced. The children wept. The father burned with rage and fear, but none of them knew that far beyond the stars, in a forest older than the Empire, a shadow had awakened, and it was moving toward them. Inside the cold belly of the warship, the family was forced into a holding cell made of walls that shimmered with pale blue energy. The air was heavy with the scent of metal and strange chemicals that burned the throat with each breath. The children pressed close to their mother, while the father tested the walls, striking them with his fists, only to feel a burning shock course through his arms. The dog limped toward the edge of the cell, his growl low and steady, his body shaking from exhaustion, yet his eyes refusing to yield. The soldiers stood on the other side of the barrier, motionless, like statues, their red lenses glowing like small suns in the dim light. The cell was not empty. There were other captives huddled in the corners, their faces hollowed by fear and despair. Some were human, taken from other worlds, enslaved by the Empire long before others were beings of shapes the family had never seen, their skin marked with patterns that pulsed faintly, their eyes wide with sorrow. One whispered words to the family. Though the language was strange, the meaning was clear. No one returned. Once taken, the children shivered and clung to their mother tighter. The father clenched his fists, helpless rage boiling in his chest. Hours passed. Though in the void of space-time seemed meaningless, the family could hear the ship groan with life, as if the metal itself breathed, each sound echoing in the silence of their confinement. The dog lay near the children, his head resting on their legs, offering what little comfort he could. The father paced like a caged beast, his every glance toward the guards filled with hatred. The mother spoke softly to the children, weaving words of hope, though her voice trembled with every syllable. Then, the silence broke as the commander appeared once more. The cell walls rippled and parted like liquid. The soldiers moved aside as the tall figure entered, towering over all. Its presence filled the chamber, pressing on the chest of everyone within. It raised one hand and light spilled into the room, forming shapes that twisted in the air. The family saw images of their home, of their village, of the forest that surrounded it, and then of a shadow that loomed within that forest, ancient and powerful. The commander spoke its words, crawling into the minds of the captives. It declared that the blood of the family was bound to something the Empire had long hunted, a force older than their civilization, a force that could bend destiny itself. The father demanded to know what the commander meant, but his words were drowned by a surge of static that buzzed through the air. The children cried out as the lights shifted again, showing visions of experiments, cages, and tools of cruelty. The meaning was clear: they would be studied, dissected, torn apart until the truth of their bloodline was revealed. The mother closed her eyes, fighting to keep from screaming as the commander turned its burning gaze upon her. The dog barked furiously, his body pressed against the barrier until sparks hissed at his fervor. Commander gave the order, and the family was dragged from the cell into Katera, a corridor where the walls pulsed with streams of light, their captors leading them toward chambers unknown. The father fought the restraints, though each struggle only brought more pain. The children cried for freedom, the mother whispered for them to be strong, and the dog barked until his throat was raw. The soldiers marched without hesitation, their boots echoing against the steel floor, each step taking the family deeper into the heart of the ship. They did not know that far across the void in the endless forest, Baba Yaga had already risen her hut, groaning as it stretched its limbs, her fury guiding her through the darkness, her path carved straight to the ones who dared touch what was hers. Far away from the cold steel of the Empire ship, the ancient forests lay wrapped in darkness, the trees tall and twisted, their branches reaching like claws into the night. The wind moved through the leaves with a low, mournful song, and deep within the shadows, the hut of Baba Yaga stirred. It sat upon its enormous chicken legs, bent and knotted like roots of an old tree. The walls of the hut groaned as they too breathed. The windows glowed faintly with an inner fire that never went out. The hut shifted, restless as if answering a call beyond the horizon. Inside, Baba Yaga sat hunched over a table of bones and wood, her fingers long and crooked, tracing patterns across the surface. Her eyes were dim until they snapped open, glowing like embers as the thread of her bloodline tugged at her heart. She felt the sudden rupture as though a claw had torn through the web of fate. She felt the family dragged across the stars, their cries echoing even through the veil of distance. Her lips curled back, showing teeth sharp as broken stones. Her breath hissed like steam rising from a cauldron. The forest seemed to hold still in fear. The hut rose upon its legs with a creaking roar, shaking loose soil and roots as it stepped into the clearing. The earth split beneath each clawed step. Birds screamed from the treetops, scattering into the black sky. The wind howled louder, carrying with it whispers of dread. The villagers who lived at the edge of the forest woke and pressed their windows shut, praying not to be noticed. They knew the stories of the witch in the woods. They knew that when her hut walked, no soul was safe. Yet none of them guessed the true fury that stirred her now. Baba Yaga stretched her arms long and crooked, and shadows poured from her sleeves like rivers of smoke. The air bent around her, bending light itself. The stars above twisted as if swallowed by her gaze. She muttered words older than the earth, her voice cracking like fire and stone. With each syllable, the portal began to open, a wound in the sky, swirling with black and green flames. The hut climbed toward it, its legs carrying it higher and higher, until the trees seemed like toys beneath its stride. The crack widened, forming a tunnel that led far beyond the stars. Her eyes closed, and in the darkness she saw the Empire ship, a black shadow against the galaxy. Her vision pierced its walls. She saw the family bound in chains. She saw the dog still fighting against despair, and she saw the soldiers, their weapons gleaming, their voices cold. Her anger deepened, her fingers tightened into claws, and the forest shook. With her rage she whispered to the hut, and it obeyed, stepping into the void, its claws striking sparks against the air itself. Shadows thickened, wrapping around the hut like wings, carrying it faster through the endless dark, across dimensions, across the gulf of stars. The witch traveled, her hut creaking with every step, the sound echoing in places where no sound should exist. She was coming, drawn by the bloodline that belonged to her, by the cries of the family that carried her mark. The Empire had taken what was hers, and for that the Empire would pay. The warship cut through the void like a blade, its engines burning with silent fire, its corridors alive with the hum of machines. Yet for all its power there was an unease that spread among the soldiers. They felt it first as a vibration beneath their boots, faint and irregular like the beat of a sick heart. The lights flickered once, then steadied, though a whisper lingered in the air. The commander sat upon the throne of black steel, reviewing streams of data, symbols and maps, yet even its mechanical voice faltered for a moment when the readings bent out of ordering the holding chambers. The family stirred, the father felt the ship shudder beneath him. Though no impact struck the hull, the mother pulled the children closer, her eyes darting to the shadows as if something already moved within them. The dog whined low and restless, his ears pricking as if he heard A call beyond the walls. The other captives shifted uneasily, their hollow eyes wide with a fear deeper than despair. They too could feel it. The wrongness, the ancient weight pressing against the ship from outside. The alarms did not sound at first, only the subtle signs came: a drop in temperature, the breath of frost on metal walls, a faint mist curling across the floor. The soldiers glanced at one another, their red lenses gleaming as they adjusted their weapons, their movements sharp, but slower than before, as if something dragged at their limbs. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like wind through dead leaves, growing louder until words began to form in languages none of them knew yet. Every one of them understood it was the language of hunger, of vengeance, of wrath. The commander rose from the throne, its frame towering as it spread its arms to silence the crew, yet even its voice cracked with static as the ship trembled again. This time harder, as though invisible claws scraped against the hull. Sparks flared along the ceiling, and streams of light that ran through the corridors pulsed irregularly like veins under strain. The soldiers moved in formation, yet their steps echoed wrong, bouncing back at them from angles that should not exist. Shadows stretched far-reaching like fingers across the floor and ceiling in the cell. The dog barked furiously, his eyes fixed on the wall as though he saw something. The children cried, and the father pounded his fists against the barrier, though it burned his skin. The mother whispered that something was coming, something older than the stars. She did not know how she knew, but her heart beat with certainty. Her blood remembered what the mind could not bend. The first scream cut through the silence from a soldier in the corridor, his body lifted from the ground by nothing visible, his armor twisting with a terrible groan before he was hurled against the wall with bone-shattering force. The other soldiers fired their weapons, bolts of red light tearing through the shadows, but the darkness swallowed them whole, leaving only deeper blackness. The commander shouted orders, though its voice was drowned by the sound of metal tearing. The ship shuddered again, as though an enormous weight had landed upon it, claws of shadow scraping the hull. The stars outside bent and twisted as a shape began to emerge, enormous and crooked, its legs scratching across the void, its windows glowing like eyes of fire. Baba Yaga had arrived, and the Empire ship groaned as if it already knew the fight was lost. The alarms finally screamed through the ship, a shrill wail that rattled the metal walls. Yet even the sound seemed too small against the force that pressed upon the vessel. Soldiers ran through the corridors, their boots pounding in rhythm with the trembling of the hull. The lights flickered and burst, leaving sections drowned in darkness. Sparks hissed and smoke coiled along the ceilings. The commander barked orders in a voice that rolled like thunder, yet the crew could not hide the fear in their movements. They were warriors of the Empire, bred to know no fear, yet something older than fear itself had already sunk its claws into them. The first breach came without warning. The ceiling of the main corridor split open, as if torn by unseen talons. Jagged metal curled downward like paper, and a cold wind poured through, though they were deep in space and no air should have entered. Soldiers raised their weapons, firing beams of red that streaked through the shadows. The beams struck nothing, yet the shadows twisted and surged forward, swallowing the light whole. A figure began to take shape, crooked and immense, her silhouette bending against reason, her head bowed, her hair wild as smoke, her eyes glowing with fire. Baba Yaga had stepped into the heart of the warship. The soldiers staggered back, some dropping their weapons, others firing wildly, their shots ricocheting harmlessly as the shadows bent them away. Baba Yaga raised one hand, her fingers long and crooked, her nails black as obsidian, and with that gesture the floor rippled as if it were water. Soldiers screamed as they were pulled under, vanishing into the metal as though it had swallowed them whole. The corridor reeked of burning iron and old earth, the smell of a forest grave carried into the void. The family saw her first through the shimmer of their cell. The children pressed their faces against the barrier, their fear melting into awe. The mother whispered a name, though she did not know how she knew it. Baba Yaga, she said, her voice trembling yet filled with relief. The father stared at the crooked figure, both terrified and desperate, his heart torn between fear of the witch and the hope that she was there for them. The dog barked fiercely, tail whipping against the floor as if recognizing an ally born of something beyond the stars. Baba Yaga moved deeper into the ship, her hut straddling the hull outside each step, sending tremors through the corridors. Her presence twisted the air around. Her metal-groaned walls cracked and sparks rained like embers. Soldiers tried to regroup, but the shadows betrayed them, turning corners into mazes, leading them back into her path. One raised a blade of energy, only to have it rot into rust in his hands. Another shouted defiance before his voice was choked by invisible hands pressing against his throat. Baba Yaga did not rush. She moved with the certainty of inevitability. Each step a sentence past, the commander stepped forward, towering in, its black steel armor light streaming from its crown. It raised a staff of pure energy and struck the ground. The shockwaves surged through the corridor, scattering debris. The shadows recoiled for a moment but then rushed back, stronger. Baba Yaga lifted her crooked staff carved from bone and root. She slammed it against the floor, and the entire ship screamed as if alive. The commander staggered but did not fall, its burning gaze fixed upon her, the ancient witch, and the master of the empire. Vessel now stood face to face, in the heart of steel and shadow. The corridor shook as the commander lifted its staff, the weapon blazing with pure energy, streams of light twisting around it like serpents. It moved forward, each step pounding like a drum echoing through the vessel. The soldiers rallied behind, their leader forming ranks. Though their hands shook and their movements were no longer perfect discipline, they fired their weapons in a storm of red beams. But Baba Yaga did not flinch. Her shadows rose around her like a cloak, swallowing the fire and bending it back upon the soldiers. Their screams filled the corridor as armor melted and walls cracked under the weight of twisted power. The commander raised its staff high and struck again, a spear of light tearing down the corridor. It split the shadows for a heartbeat, slicing into the metal walls and filling the air with blinding fire. Yet when the smoke cleared, Baba Yaga stood unmoved, her crooked body bent yet unbroken, her staff carved of bone and root pulsing with ancient power. She pointed it at the commander, and the ground beneath its feet cracked open, roots bursting from the steel floor, coiling around its legs. The commander tore free, but the roots hissed with green flame, leaving scars even upon its armored body. Family watched from their cell, eyes wide with terror and hope. The children clung to their mother, who whispered to stay quiet, to stay close. The father pressed his hands against the barrier, his heart pounding. The dog barked furiously, his voice carrying over the chaos. Baba Yaga did not turn her gaze to them yet. They felt her presence, they felt the bond in their blood, as if she had already claimed them as her own. The captives in the nearby cells cried out in awe, some kneeling, some reaching toward the witch who fought against the empire with wrath older than stars. The commander lunged forward, swinging the staff in an arc of light. The blow struck Baba Yaga squarely, and the corridor erupted with an explosion that hurled soldiers into the walls. Sparks rained down, the ship itself groaned as if in agony. Yet when the light faded, the witch rose again, her laughter a sound of cracking wood and howling wind. Her eyes blazed brighter, her staff slammed down once more, and the shadows surged like a tidal wave, crashing against the commander, forcing it back step by step. Each clash shook the ship, each strike left scars upon its walls. The soldiers broke ranks, panic spreading through them. They fled down corridors only to find those passages folding upon themselves, leading them back into the path of Baba Yaga. No escape lay within the vessel. Her magic bent the space itself, turning the warship into her forest of nightmares. Branches curling out of metal, roots bursting from the ground, shadows hunting the fleeing crew one by one. The commander roared with fury, its voice layered with static and fire. It tore through the shadows, swinging its staff and carving wide arcs of burning light. It met Baba Yaga in the center of the corridor, their weapons clashing with force that sent shockwaves through the vessel. The sound like thunder rolling across the void. Neither yielded, neither bent. The fate of the family, and perhaps the fate of the ship, hung in the balance as ancient magic and imperial might collided in a storm of fire and darkness. The ship groaned as if alive, its walls trembling with every clash between Baba Yaga and the commander. Sparks rained down and smoke coiled like mist in a burning forest. Soldiers who had once marched with perfect order now stumbled in chaos, their weapons faltering in their hands. Some fled down corridors that twisted and folded into shadow. Others screamed as the floor itself opened beneath them, swallowing them whole. The corridors that once gleamed with cold light now pulsed with roots and branches curling from every crack, dripping with sap that hissed like acid upon the steel. Baba Yaga lifted her staff high, her crooked form outlined in fire, her shadows stretching across the walls like the wings of a monstrous bird. With one motion she swept the soldiers aside, their bodies flung against the walls, their armor cracking like shells. She did not stop, her eyes burned brighter than the ship's engines, her breath steaming with fury, her voice a rasp that filled every chamber. She called to the forest, her magic spilling across the void. The ship became a cage of bone and bark twisting around her will. The commander staggered forward, its staff raised high, a figure of power still, yet the roots clung to its legs and shadows coiled around its arms. It roared and struck the floor, sending waves of fire across the corridor. But Baba Yaga walked through the blaze, untouched. The fire bent around her as though afraid of her presence. Her laughter shook the walls, a sound older Then the soldiers dropped their weapons, some falling to their knees in terror, others clawing at the doors that no longer opened. In the cell, the family clung to each other. The father pressed his hand against the shimmering barrier, willing it to break. The mother whispered prayers, though she did not know to whom. The children stared with wide eyes torn between fear and awe. The dog barked wildly, his tail thrashing, as if urging the witch onward. Though he had never seen her, he seemed to know she was there. Salvation. The captives in the other cells wept, some whispering her name as though it were a hymn, others simply falling silent, their hope restored after years of despair. The battle reached its peak as Baba Yaga and the commander met once more, their staffs colliding with a sound like worlds colliding. The corridor exploded with force, tearing through bulkheads, sending debris tumbling. The ship lurched in the void as if struck by an asteroid. Alarms shrieked, red lights flashing across the vessel. The commander staggered, its armor cracked, its voice breaking with static. Still it tried to rise, lifting the staff again, but Baba Yaga pressed her crooked hand forward, and the shadows surged like a storm, drowning the light, consuming the last of its strength. The commander fell, its staff clattering against the floor, sparks flying as it shattered into fragments. The silence that followed was heavy like the end of a storm. Soldiers who remained dropped to the ground, trembling. Some fled into the darkness, though the ship offered no escape. Baba Yaga lowered her staff, her gaze turning at last to the family, her eyes blazing yet softer now, filled with recognition. The barrier that bound them flickered, sparks dancing before it collapsed into nothing. The father rushed forward, seizing his children. The mother cried out with relief. The dog leaped, barking with joy. Baba Yaga had broken the chains of the empire, and freedom was within reach. The silence that filled the warship after the battle was heavy. Every corridor broken and twisted, every wall scorched and scarred. The soldiers who remained alive hid in the shadows, their courage shattered, their eyes wide with terror. None dared to move as Baba Yaga turned her gaze across the ship, her crooked frame outlined by the glow of fire and shadow. The commander lay broken, its armor cracked, its crown of light dimmed into nothing. The staff shattered into fragments across the floor. The once invincible master of the vessel now only wreckage at the feet of the ancient witch. The family stumbled free of their prison, their chains gone. The father held his children tight, his heart pounding with relief. The mother wept openly, her tears running down her face as she touched the dog, who barked and wagged his tail with wild joy, even as his body ached. The children clung to their parents, their eyes never leaving Baba Yaga. Torn between fear and gratitude, they felt in their bones that she was the reason they were alive. Her presence filled the air like a storm, and yet she had come for them. Baba Yaga moved through the broken corridor, her staff tapping against the steel floor, her steps slow and deliberate, every sound echoing like thunder. The hut outside the ship scratched its claws across the hull, keeping it steady. Though the stars bent and twisted around it, the ship was no longer its own, it belonged to her. Now she stretched one crooked hand toward the family, her fingers long, her nails black as stone. The father tensed, ready to defend his children, though he knew he could not. The mother froze, her breath caught in her throat. The children buried their faces against their parents, but the dog stood firm, barking. Once sharp and loud, her hand did not strike, it lifted gently, curling around them, not with claws but with the weight of protection. Shadows swirled around the family, lifting them free of the wreckage, carrying them toward the portal that yawned open. In the air, the stars rippled like water as the hut stepped through, dragging the ship behind it. Baba Yaga's voice rasped across the corridors, words that no tongue could shape yet. Every soldier understood, a warning, a curse, never again to touch what was hers. The ship cracked and groaned, breaking apart as the hut tore through space. The fragments of steel swallowed by the void, the cries of soldiers lost to the shadows. The family felt the air shift, the cold metal replaced by the scent of earth and pine. They opened their eyes to see their home, the forest surrounding them, the village lights flickering in the distance. The hut settled upon its legs, lowering itself with a groan. The shadows receded, leaving only the witch standing crooked and terrible in the moonlight. The father held his children close, the mother clutched the dog. The family stared at Baba Yaga, unsure if they should bow or flee, yet she only looked at them, her eyes still burning, though softer now, filled with something older than kindness, older than love. She turned without a word, her hut creaking as it walked back into the forest, its silhouette swallowed by the trees. The night grew still once more, the family safe, yet forever marked by what had happened. And across the galaxy, the story spread, whispered among soldiers and rulers alike, that the empire had touched a family, and in doing so had awakened the witch in the woods. Her name carried in fear and awe, Baba Yaga, the one who came when no one else dared, the one who humbled the empire with shadows and wrath.